Okay. Can you see that, Donald? Is that working?
Yep, that's fine. That's great. So
Okay. All right.
after Will has been taking us to the Mediterranean and blue skies and mountaintops, I want to take you to the world of piles of rotting seaweed on the seashore around the British coast, which is a little bit more mundane, I fear. But so I want to talk about the Kelp-fly recording scheme, which was started up around this time last year. And it's, as the name says, it's about recording a small number of species that are found in rotting seaweed on the seashore. So could I have the next slide, Zoe, please? So as I said, there are very few species. There's 3 different families which are covered in the scheme. There are headshots of the different species there, just to give you an idea of what they are. All quite bristly and I think not very beautiful flies to my eyes. But anyway, they're what live in the seaweed. So it's rather unusual. I initially just intended to do Coleoptidae, which are the 3 species in that, but there are 2 other families, Heterochelidae and Helicomas, of which is 1 species each in these families, which are also, there's only 1 species, British species on the UK list in these species, and they're found in seaweed. There are other flies found in seaweed which are not covered in the scheme. Notably, there's a sepsid, which looks at first sight rather like one of these, but that's covered by the Sepsidae recording scheme. And then there are all the things that you're likely to come across, such as some dung flies, some anthemiads, which have very nice wing waving behavior and are more found on the shingle beside the seaweed rather than on the seaweed. And there are also some tiny little spherocerids, again, which are not covered by the scheme. So that's the caveat. It's just the big, nasty, bristly flies that I'm interested in for this scheme. And Zoe, can I have the next slide, please? So I could go through each species in detail. I don't really want to do that, though. I just want to give you an example of how things look. So the most abundant, the most common fly is this Coleoptera frigida, which has been called the Bristly Leg Seaweed Fly by Stephen Falk on his Flitter postings. And I'm just putting here the most recent NBN map for the species. You can see it has really a distribution all around the coast of Britain, as far as Shetland, but into the Outer Isles. Bit of a gap on the east coast of England, but I presume that's just a recording gap. And what I would like to bring your attention to is that the seasonality data for it at the bar graph at the bottom shows that this fly can be found every season of the year. And I think I went out on New Year's Day last year and found them quite happily in piles of seaweed near where my mother lives on the beach. So they're there to be found whenever you want to go out and find them, which means that this the bulge in the middle of the distribution of the seasonality, that's a measure of dipterists rather than this fly. I think that shows our recording effort rather than the presence of these flies. So this species at least is breeding all year round in seaweed on the shore. I've got a close-up of the head of this species on the right, and I particularly like the jaw. It has this jutting chin and very bristly face. And so if I could have the next slide, Zoe, I wonder if we could give it a new name instead of calling it the bristly seaweed fly. Could you go back one, Zoe? I want to call this the Desperate Dan seaweed fly because it has obvious similarities to the well-known character. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please, Zoe? So what's the interest in these flies? Well, obviously there's a small number of species. 5 species is a reasonable small number to get your handle on. They're all very widely distributed. And apart from 1 species, they can be found all year. And it's reasonably easy to validate records from photos that are sent in. So I've been doing that on iRecord, and these are now coming from iNaturalist. And some on Facebook as well. I hope that setting up this recording scheme will allow me to collate existing records. And one thing that would be on a research side is to try and see if we can support a a claim that has been made that one of this Coalopa species, Coalopa pilipes, has been spreading northwards to the north of Scotland, Orkney. It's not made Shetland yet, but anyway, this has been a recent change. So it'd be very interesting to know if we can support this from historical records and from continuing observations. And just from a personal point of view, why the Kelp-fly recording scheme? So I happened to have found several of the species, so it was easy for me to say, right, I can recognize these things. And I was quite keen to contribute to the Diptera recording, which is a fantastic thing. I just wanted to be part of that. But I also, as a novice to the field, I found the recording landscape for Diptera, or not just Diptera, but just in general, very confusing. And it gave me a chance to understand what this recording landscape is. So Zoe, could I have the next slide? What I thought I was getting myself into was kind of the bottom bit in the circle, so that I knew that there was this NBN atlas and that people would put records into iRecord, and that my role would be to verify records and feed them into the atlas. And I now realize, a year on in my wisdom, I realize it's a lot more complicated than that, obviously, as I'm sure you all know, but I just want to run through this because it's I think it's interesting on a family with so few species as this. So there is on the top left, I've got a spreadsheet. So there's individuals with their own personal records, which I'm keen to get into a database and feed into the atlas. There's also in journals that have published records and different things. I'm particularly thinking of Scottish Islands have good fly lists that could be put into the database. And obviously already the Dipterists Forum meeting databases goes directly into NBN Atlas. But then going to the top right, there's a lot of specimens in museums that don't appear in the databases. There's the social media side of things, which is a large area of unknown complexity, and then all the survey work that goes on, which to some extent is maybe already carrying into NBN. So it's not just, I just say this as it's helped me to understand how these different things feed together into producing what I think is, for me, is the ultimate thing, which is that you have a map on NBN Atlas that anybody can then go and look at and say, all right, that's the distribution, that's the historical data on this particular species. So that's what it would be nice to approach. And I realize it's a daunting task, even for only 5 species. So could I just have the last slide, please, Zoe? Where I'm at is I'm very keen to get additional records, particularly from the north of Scotland and the islands. And people have specimens in their personal collections. I'd be very happy to add those into the database. And also, people may have surveys or know of literature, and I'm starting to get a handle on data in museums. Jeff Hancock has kindly been through the Hunterian specimens, and I'm hoping to get into the National Museum of Scotland and look at their specimens very soon. But obviously there's many more museums than that. I feel I should make some kind of resource available for people to identify these kelp flies and put something on the Dipterists Forum website. So that's something I need to do. And on a more investigatory aspect, there's a very good PhD from the 50s by Eggleshaw on kelp flies. But there's a very large literature on kelp flies because there's an interest in biology in their sexual behavior. Quite interested to know how the flies relate to the spring and neap tides. I'm sure there must be an interesting life history thing going on there which has not been described. And the last thing I wanted to mention is one of the species, Helicomas Gelato, which is the one I've not seen so far. I'm still looking out for it, but it seems there are no records on NBN from December to April, so it seems to disappear in contrast to all the other kelp flies. So that's a question: does it breed all year? Is it genuinely doing something else in the winter? And I'm very keen to hear if anybody's ideas, or if anybody can provide records. That'd be fantastic. I've put the recording scheme website up there. So thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to the records flooding in.
Thank you very much. That was a very informative presentation on what is quite a small group of flies. And I do have some records I'll be supplying you. Are there any questions for Donald? I haven't got any in the chat box or the question box. Anybody have any?